Please hold for commentary based on the Book of Ecclesiastes after the news. November 18th, 2017, and these are the stories that matter. Headline: House Republicans pass tax reform bill, Senate draft advances. House Republicans on Thursday passed a monumental bill to cut taxes on businesses and individuals, the biggest step yet in the GOP's once-in-a-generation effort to overhaul the American tax system. The tax reform plan passed the chamber with 227 votes in favor and 205 against. To pass the bill, the House GOP had to overcome opposition from several of its members who live in high-tax blue states. Those lawmakers objected to the proposal's curb on popular state and local tax deductions. The House plan would chop the corporate tax rate to 20% from 35% and make other tweaks aiming to make businesses more competitive. It would reduce individual tax brackets to 4 from 7 and make changes to several tax breaks. Among them, the bill would limit state and local tax deductions and the mortgage interest deduction, eliminate the personal exemption, and nearly double the standard deduction. The vote marks a significant achievement as Republicans push to put a tax bill on President Donald Trump's desk by Christmas. Trump, who along with most congressional Republicans ran on a pledge to trim taxes, went to Capitol Hill to push GOP lawmakers to support the bill before the vote. Later Thursday, Trump called the vote, quote, a big step toward fulfilling our promise to deliver historic tax cuts for the American people by the end of the year, end quote. The Senate version of the bill cleared the Finance Committee late Thursday night. Despite passage of the House bill Thursday, pitfalls await the party. Senate Republicans hope to pass their own bill as soon as the week after Thanksgiving. One GOP Senator, Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, opposes the chamber's bill as written. Several other Republicans in the Senate, where the GOP holds a slim 2-seat majority, have expressed doubts about the upper chamber's version. The budget deficits generated by chopping tax rates, the expiration of individual tax cuts in 2025, and the effective repeal of Obamacare's individual mandate could all turn into sticking points in the Senate plan. Should the Senate GOP pass its bill, the two chambers will have to craft a joint plan before Congress can pass final legislation. Agreeing on legislation carries its own challenges, like raising the money to comply with the Senate budget rules without alienating Republican lawmakers. The most significant difference between the chamber's plans is the treatment of state and local tax deductions. The Senate plan would eliminate those deductions entirely. The measure could alienate some House Republicans who voted for the chamber's bill that would allow up to $10,000 in property tax deductions. After the bill's passage, Representative Dan Donovan, a Republican of New York, told CNBC that he voted no because of the elimination of the ability to deduct state and local taxes. Quote, "This is unfair to New Yorkers. I am in favor of reforming our tax code. It's overburdensome, it's complex, it's unfair. But the one thing that we have to do is make sure that all Americans receive a tax cut," end quote, he said. Donovan said he believes New Yorkers, quote, deserve the same break that the rest of America is going to get and not pay for the tax cut that the rest of the nation is going to see, end quote. Most Americans would see taxes reduced under the plan as passed by the House Ways and Means Committee, according to the Tax Policy Center. But roughly a quarter of Americans could have their taxes hiked by 2027, the analysis said. The Republican plan is expected to get no Democratic support throughout the process. The party, which already criticized the GOP bill as a giveaway to the wealthy, got more fuel for its opposition when the Senate added a repeal of the Obamacare individual mandate to its bill. Headline: Trump delays new policy on importing elephant parts. President Donald Trump said Friday he's delaying a new policy allowing the body parts of African elephants shot for sport to be imported until he can review, quote, all conservation facts, end quote. The United States Fish and Wildlife Service said Thursday it would allow such importation, arguing that encouraging wealthy big game hunters to kill the threatened species would help raise money for conservation programs. Animal rights advocates criticized the policy. California Representative Ed Royce, the Republican chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, urged the administration to reverse the policy, calling it, quote, the wrong move at the wrong time, end quote. Trump tweeted Friday that the policy had been, quote, under study for years, end quote. He said he would put the decision on hold and review it with Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke. Zinke issued a statement later Friday saying, President Trump and I have talked and both believe that conservation and healthy herds are critical. As a result, in a manner complying with all laws, rules, and regulations, the issuing of permits is being put on hold as the decision is being reviewed, end quote. Royce questioned the action because of concerns not only about African wildlife, but U.S. national security, citing the political upheaval in Zimbabwe, where the longtime president was placed under house arrest this week by the military. Quote, the administration should withdraw this decision until Zimbabwe stabilizes, the committee chairman said in a statement. Quote, elephants and other big game in Africa are blood currency for terrorist organizations, and they are being killed at an alarming rate. Stopping poaching isn't just about saving the world's most majestic animals for the future. It's about our national security, end quote. The Fish and Wildlife Service said in a written notice issued Thursday that permitting elephants from Zimbabwe and Zambia to be brought back as trophies will raise money for conservation programs. The change marks a shift in efforts to stop the importation of elephant tusks and hides, overriding a 2014 ban imposed by the Obama administration. The new policy applies to the remains of African elephants killed between January 2016 and December 2018. Quote, legal, well-regulated sport hunting as a part of a sound management program can benefit certain species by providing incentives to local communities to conserve those species and by putting much-needed revenue back into conservation, end quote, the agency said in a statement. Royce said that when carefully regulated, conservation hunts could help the wildlife population, but, quote, that said, this is the wrong move at the wrong time, end quote. He described the perilous situation in Zimbabwe, where the U.S. Embassy has advised Americans to limit their travel outdoors. Quote, in this moment of turmoil, I have zero confidence that the regime, which for years has promoted corruption at the highest levels, is properly managing and regulating conservation programs, end quote, Royce said. Furthermore, I am not convinced that elephant populations in the area warrant over-concentration measures, end quote. The world's largest land mammal, the African elephant, has been classified as threatened under the U.S. Endangered Species Act since 1979. Illicit demand for elephant ivory has led to devastating losses from illegal poaching, as a natural habitat available for the animals to roam has also dwindled by more than half. As a result, the number of African elephants has shrunk from about 5 million a century ago to about 400,000 remaining, and that number continues to decline each year. Two other lawmakers, Representatives Vern Buchanan, Republican of Florida, and Earl Blumenauer, Democrat of Oregon, co-chairs of the Congressional Animal Protection Caucus, assailed the administration's decision. Quote, we should not encourage the hunting and slaughter of these magnificent creatures, Buchanan said. We don't get a second chance once a species becomes extinct, end quote. One group that advocates for endangered species called for more action after Trump's Friday night tweet. Quote, it's great that the public outrage has forced Trump to reconsider this despicable decision, but it takes more than a tweet to stop trophy hunters from slaughtering elephants and lions, said Tanya Sanarib, senior attorney with the Center for Biological Diversity. Quote, we need immediate federal action to reverse these policies and protect these amazing animals. Headline, U.S. puts Palestinians on notice, D.C. office may be shuttered. The Trump administration put the Palestinians on notice Friday that it will shutter their office in Washington unless they've entered serious peace talks with Israel, U.S. officials said, giving President Donald Trump more leverage as he seeks an elusive Mideast peace deal. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has determined that the Palestinians ran afoul of a provision in U.S. law that says the Palestinian Liberation Organization's mission must close if the Palestinians try to get the International Criminal Court to prosecute Israelis for crimes against Palestinians. A State Department official said that in September, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas crossed that line by calling on the ICC to investigate and prosecute Israelis. But the law leaves the president a way out, so Tillerson's declaration doesn't necessarily mean the office will close. Trump now has 90 days to consider whether the Palestinians are, quote, in direct and meaningful negotiations with Israel, end quote. If Trump determines they are, the Palestinians can keep the office. The official said it was unclear whether the U.S. might close the office before the 90-day period expires, but said the mission remains open, at least for now. Even if the office closes, the U.S. said it wasn't cutting off relations with the Palestinians and was still focused on a, quote, comprehensive peace agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians, end quote. The State Department official said in an email that, quote, this measure should in no way be seen as a signal that the U.S. is backing off those efforts. The official wasn't authorized to be identified by name and requested anonymity. The PLO office and the Israeli embassy in Washington did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Although the Israelis and Palestinians are not engaged in active direct negotiations, Trump's administration has been working all year to broker a peace deal that would end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Led by Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law and a senior aide, White House officials have been preparing a peace proposal that they intend to put forward at an unspecified time. The Palestinians, though publicly supportive of the U.S. effort, have been skeptical because Trump's close ties to Israel suggest whatever deal he proposes might be unfavorable to them. The threat of losing their office in the U.S. Capitol could become another pressure point as the Trump administration seeks to persuade the Palestinians to come to the table. The Palestinian Liberation Organization is a group that formally represents all Palestinians. Although the U.S. does not recognize Palestinian statehood, the PLO maintains a, quote, general delegation, end quote, office in Washington that facilitates Palestinian officials' interactions with the U.S. government. The United States allowed the PLO to open a mission in Washington in 1994, a move that required then-President Bill Clinton to waive a law that said the Palestinians couldn't have an office. In 2011, under the Obama administration, the United States started letting the Palestinians fly their flag over the office, an upgrade to the status of their mission that the Palestinians hailed as historic. Israel opposes any Palestinian membership in United Nations-related organizations until a peace deal has been reached. The Trump administration has not revealed any details about its effort to bring about a peace deal that would ostensibly grant the Palestinians an independent state in exchange for an end to its conflict with the Israelis. But Kushner and other top Trump aides have been shuttling to the region to meet with Palestinians, Israelis, and officials from neighboring Arab nations as it prepares to put forward a peace plan. Headline: Keystone Pipeline leak won't affect last regulatory hurdle. Discovery of a 210,000-gallon oil leak from the Keystone Pipeline would seem to be poor timing 4 days before regulators in Nebraska decide whether to allow a major expansion of the system, but officials say state law does not allow pipeline safety to be a factor in their decision. The Nebraska Public Service Commission was scheduled to rule Monday if a Keystone XL expansion pipeline proposed by TransCanada Corporation can cross the state. The Commission's decision is the last major regulatory hurdle for a project that has faced numerous local, state, and federal reviews and lawsuits since it was announced in 2008. TransCanada shut down the existing pipeline Thursday morning, and workers were testing to determine the cause of the spill on agricultural land in Marshall County, South Dakota, near the North Dakota border, about 250 miles west of Minneapolis. The Nebraska vote Monday will be on a proposed route for Keystone XL, a massive expansion that would also be operated by TransCanada. The new pipeline would carry an estimated 830,000 barrels of oil per day from the oil sands areas of Canada through Montana, South Dakota, and Nebraska, where it would connect with the existing Keystone pipeline. The decision will hinge on testimony and documents generated from public hearings over the summer and from more than 500,000 public comments, Nebraska Public Service Commission spokesman Deb Collins said. A state law passed in 2011 prevents the commission from factoring pipeline safety or the possibility of leaks into its decisions. Quote, "The commission's decision will be based on evidence in the record," end quote, Collins said. The Keystone XL proposal has faced intense opposition in Nebraska from a coalition of environmental groups, Native American tribes, and some landowners who don't want the pipeline running through their property. Nebraska lawmakers gave the five-member commission the power to regulate major oil pipelines in 2011 in response to a public outcry over the pipeline and its potential impact on the Sand Hills, an ecologically fragile region of grass-covered sand dunes. But when they passed the law, legislators argued that pipeline safety is a federal responsibility and should not factor into the decision. State and company officials said this bill was not a threat to waterways or drinking water, but critics were quick to use the leak as an example of what they see as the risk to the environment. Opponents of Keystone XL are incensed that the leak won't be considered. Quote, "There is a reason TransCanada and the big oil lobby did not want this information on the record," end quote, said Jane Klebe, director of the Bold Alliance, a coalition of groups that have opposed the Keystone XL for nearly a decade. President Donald Trump issued a federal permit for the expansion project in March, even though it had been rejected by the Obama administration. The existing Keystone pipeline, where the leak was discovered, transports crude from Canada to refineries in Illinois and a major storage hub in Oklahoma, passing through the eastern Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri. It can handle nearly 600,000 barrels daily, or about 23 million gallons. Since 2010, the companies have reported 17 spills of oil or petroleum products in the U.S., the same size or larger than the leak announced Thursday, according to the U.S. Department of Transportation records. Officials in South Dakota said they weren't notified about the leak until roughly 5 hours after TransCanada discovered it. Brian Walsh, an environmental scientist manager at the South Dakota Department of Environment and Natural Resources, said officials would likely inquire about the delay but were focusing immediately on the spill. TransCanada said Friday the leak was controlled and posed no threat to public safety. The company has sent more than 75 workers to the spill site, including environmental, engineering, and emergency response specialists. TransCanada spokesman Matthew John said the company will need to do, quote, extensive testing, end quote, along with the federal regulators and independent testing facilities before they can pinpoint a cause. An aerial photo released by TransCanada on Twitter that the company says is of the spill shows a darkened area on flat agricultural land. There do not appear to be any waterways or towns nearby. Headline, Police Officer Slain Near Pittsburgh, Gunman Still at Large. A manhunt was underway in western Pennsylvania early Saturday for a suspect in the fatal shooting of a rookie police officer Friday night in a town outside Pittsburgh. The suspect is considered armed and dangerous, authorities said. Officer Brian Shaw had been with the New Kensington, Pennsylvania Police Department for less than a year, Police Chief Jim Klein said at a news conference, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette reported. Quote, "I'm asking anybody with any information, as minute as they think it might be, please give us a call. We need to find the person who did this," end quote, Klein said, Pittsburgh's WTAE-TV reported. Meanwhile, authorities located a brown, older model Jeep Grand Cherokee that had been sought in connection with the slaying, police said. Residents of the neighborhood where the shooting took place said they'd experienced some recent trouble in the community, with one resident telling the Post-Gazette about a methamphetamine lab bust that occurred last week just down the block. Galea Jones, 17, told the Post-Gazette she, quote, knew something bad must have happened, end quote, when multiple police cars sped past her on the way home. Although Shaw was new to the force, his impact seemed to be felt throughout the community, as evident in WTAE's David Kaplan's tweet. Sierra Herbst, a former co-worker and friend of Shaw, described him as, quote, the most genuine guy who honestly cared about everyone, end quote, reported the Pittsburgh Tribune Review. Quote, he was a great family man and always thought about his community and always wanted to help anyone he could, end quote, classmate David Fleck told the paper. Allie Wilhelm, Shaw's friend, told the Tribune Review that becoming a police officer was, quote, all he talked about, end quote, since he was in his late teens, telling her, quote, it's my calling. Folks, earlier this week, the 2018 Global Atheist Convention, which was scheduled for February in Melbourne, Australia, was canceled due to a lack of ticket sales, lack of interest. What I found ironic about this is that the convention had its own, brand, its own slogan, and this year it was a reason to hope, which I found remarkably ironic. And of course, I go right to Ecclesiastes, actually the first chapter and the second verse. Really, the whole book of Ecclesiastes applies here, but immediately I went to the first chapter and the second verse, which reads, and I'm reading from the NIV today, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Now, first, let's take a look at that verse, and what a powerful way to open a book. I mean, the first verse is an introductory, the words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem, assuming that the book of Ecclesiastes is based on Solomon and Solomon's teachings. Not written by him, but used for the book. Now, you take that verse and apply it to atheism, and you realize that atheism stops at that verse. Where in the book of Ecclesiastes, really the entire book, if you take the entire book, really gives hope, which is in contrast to the misconceptions out there about the book. I think Ecclesiastes is among the least read books of the Bible, which is a shock to me, but which I don't understand. But I think it's based on the misconceptions that the book is dark and it's nihilistic and it's depressing and all this kind of stuff. And if you take the book as a whole, it really isn't. You get to the 12th chapter and there is hope there. And throughout you get hope. But the hope is really found, at the end in Ecclesiastes 12:13. But the entire book really does give hope. But with atheists, it really stops right at the beginning with this verse. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Because to an atheist, everything is meaningless. And that's it. And there's no hope after that. There's no reason for anything. We are dust. We came to be. It was all an accident. We're just a bunch of molecules bouncing into each other here. And we're going to die and we return to the earth. And that's it for the atheist. Now, the atheist will argue that you don't need Scripture for a moral code. I think that's utterly bunk. You cannot live in a society for 2,000. You can't have a history of 2,000 years of Judeo-Christian values and ignore that and say, well, we would have been moral anyway. That's bunk. That's bunk. An individual can say that he will be moral, but there's nothing underpinning that to keep it that way. So when times get desperate, will that morality hold up? When you desperately need something, when you desperately want something, does a moral code without any underpinning withstand that need, that desire? It doesn't. So on a society level, it doesn't hold either. It eventually collapsed, and we're seeing that now. We're seeing the further away we get from belief and respect for a supreme being, for a God, we see the effects in society. We are not the same as we were 50 years ago, 60 years ago. We just aren't. And the only parallel is a distancing ourselves from Scripture, from Judeo-Christian values. And that's evident. I can't imagine anyone trying to dispute that. The evidence is pretty clear. So anyway, back to Ecclesiastes and atheism. So atheism stops with everything is meaningless, and there is no hope after that. So everything you do in this life is meaningless to the atheist. For the Christian, it is not meaningless. And throughout Ecclesiastes, and the entire message of the book is there is meaning. There is purpose to what you're doing, even in the smallest detail of your life, even in the most mundane tasks that you feel you have to go through, that you're burdened with. There is meaning because you are serving, because you are a image bearer of God. And that's where your hope is. That's where your hope lies. Ecclesiastes 12:13, which closes the book, basically, it is fear God and keep his commandments, for that is the duty of men. So Ecclesiastes is not this depressing nihilistic book. It does give hope. Because the rest of the Bible is really about the next life. The Old Testament, throughout the history that it draws, is really about the connection to God. The New Testament and the life of Christ is really about the next life. There is some about conduct here and how to conduct ourselves. But the New Testament really is about salvation and the next life. Now, we aren't just a collection of molecules and dust. We will move on from this. The Book of Ecclesiastes is not this nihilistic, depressing book. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it's near the middle of the Bible. Because on each side of this, we have the history of the Old Testament and the connection to God. And on the other side is the New Testament, which is all about Christ and salvation. So the next life. And the rest of the Bible really doesn't answer the question, the yearning, the screaming from the human race of, I accept that there's a next life, but what about this one? What are we doing here? Why are we here? And what is the point? Where's the meaning? And that's why you read the book of Ecclesiastes, because it gives you that hope and meaning. And it is the antidote to atheists. I always recommend to Christians who have a friend who's an atheist and they want to maybe talk about Christianity and salvation and the next life and so forth, and about their soul, to start this person with the book of Ecclesiastes, because it is the only book, or is the primary book in the Bible that deals with life now. And Ecclesiastes, I think I said this before, is the antidote to atheism, I believe. Because at least it's the portal. At least it's the starting point. It's a great access point into the rest of the Bible, especially for atheists who cannot, accept anything beyond what they can see and touch and taste and feel. So it was ironic. It's ironic that the atheists would title their convention "A Reason for Hope," and deliciously ironic that it died for a lack of interest because they couldn't sell enough tickets. Because, I'm sorry, but there is no hope there. Folks, that's all I have today. Thanks so much for being with me and taking the time. Do not have a great day. Get out there and make it a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.